Good morning. This is Barrett Watten, and I'm speaking from Detroit in the United States. I've got a lot to say on the issue of the wokism debate that Jérôme Lebre has publicized and has asked for responses to. And I want to comment in the concept of being canceled or cancel culture. My first response to Jérôme's call was to circulate a YouTube video by the highly talented performer Contrapoints, and I've circulated that link. My YouTube is not going to be anywhere near as professional or rehearsed. What is remarkable about Contrapoints video is, on the one hand, the step-by-step investigation into the phenomenon of calling out and canceling, which she's experienced in her own community of trans intellectuals, trans performers. And she details precisely how that occurred in her experience, but makes generalizations about it. So the first thing I would say about canceling, it's a systematic phenomenon. It has regularities, and those can be discussed, described, and countered. One of the texts I've looked at in thinking about this is an anthology here published in English called Panics and Persecutions by a sort of centrist, or might even be liberationist publication called Quillette. What was so interesting is the cancel phenomenon occurred in numerous communities that were completely separate from each other in terms of content. So you'd have canceling going on in literature. One can certainly understand how that could happen, and in politics. But what about knitting? There's a knitting community, apparently, that was disrupted by a call out and cancel campaign. And these campaigns are exceptionally volatile and filled with irrational material in a public domain. So one of the first questions to be raised by the whole phenomenon really is, what is meant by the public? What is public about it? What is going on with this eruption of symbolic violence in the public domain? Here I'm thinking of the French context and its commitment to publicness. I'm imagining the Pantheon, which I recently drove by in Paris in November. The preparations for inducting Josephine Baker were underway. And right across the street, of course, is the famous hotel where André Breton begins Nadja. I take as my point of departure the Hotel of the Great Men. There's a publicness there that is very much a part of an intellectual framework. But what's going on in the wokism debate seems to be somewhat of a false consciousness of that publicness. I noticed that the anti-woke conference restricted the responses that were possible and did not invite alternate perspectives. And it is precisely for that reason that Jérôme is interested in collecting YouTube videos that would be an act of speech that would contest this co-optation of the domain of the public by the conservative or right-wing intellectuals who have done so. So I want to speak to this question of canceling and being canceled. I've had the experience and I'm still going through it. My response has been to counter that with an act of speech. And so I'm going to shift to my computer screen here to show some material that's available on my website. This is 2 years ago. I was set to present a paper at the Louisville Conference on Literature and Culture after 1900, a conference I attend regularly. And I was uninvited. The situation was complicated and there's not enough time to really discuss it. But I'm interested in presenting to you what my response was, which was to speak publicly. So here's a page on my website where I'm reacting to the canceling that I experienced at the Louisville Conference 2 years ago. And we moved from there to a counter event, which was on my part and my friends, to put together a alternate conference event. And we did this. We made a poster and showed up and presented counter views to this act. And finally, after the experience of presenting this, I wrote an account of it. Now, in order to frame my response, I actually went to the great French intellectual Michel Foucault and his little book on parrhesia, or fearless speech, which exists in an English translation published by Semiotext. And I use that as a site of reflection for speech. So I want to read a little bit of this non-site speech that I made. And then I want to talk about a more recent example of speech in a contested framework. So this is non-site speech, and there begins with a definition of speech, just an online source definition. Pure speech means the communication through spoken or written words or through conduct limited in form to that necessary to convey the idea. Pure speech is distinguished from symbolic speech, which means conveying an idea through behavior. Among different types of speeches, pure speech is given the greatest constitutional protection. Pure speech does not include libel, slander, and obscenity. Okay, very standard legal definition in an American context, regulating after the First Amendment and the protections for speech. A week after the Louisville Conference and the non-site event organized to counter my being canceled from the conference by feckless administrators at the University of Louisville, I want to reflect on the speech given there, not speeches, plural. Speech is a concept with a precise legal meaning, and an act of speech is what the event truly was. Speech in this sense does not simply mean a formal address or discourse delivered to an audience, but is a kind of act that, as we know, is legally protected in most instances. As a legal concept, speech is divided into two main aspects, as above: speech that conveys an idea through verbal communication, and speech that conveys it through behavior. For instance, if I am picketing a big three automaker, the first speech may be my picket sign, but the second is my presence on the public pavement outside the chain link fence of the company parking lot. It is not simply what I am saying, but what I am doing on the picket line, saying it. It's significant then that what the University of Louisville took steps to deny was not what I would say at the conference, likely some theoretical discussion of avant-garde poetry, but my presence on the campus itself. The ostensible reason for their ban was to extend Wayne State's job action, and I linked to it, conveyed in the dean's letter and now under appeal by my union in 4 concurrent grievances, to shield 7 Wayne State students and 1 faculty from my presence. In so doing, Louisville was creating the kind of safe space that has revived the concept of in loco parentis in the neoliberal client-based university. The harm it would shield them from, arguably, would be some kind of reaction to my mere presence in the hallway or at a session. The online journal Dispatches from the Poetry Wars effectively skewered this oversensitivity in an online satire. The reason for my ban, I argue, was to shield the university from any publicity concerns should my physical presence on the campus become a scandal. The symbolic meaning of my physical presence on the campus as an act of speech is what they sought to ban, thus aligning their action with the larger cancel campaign itself. The students would experience no threat by my presence at the conference. Rather, they could not tolerate it as a mere personal and social preference. They wanted a conference that was one asshole light, as one of them put it, and they used in loco parentis to get it. This is me exercising my act of speech in the non-site event. My presence at our non-site event itself was an act of speech, a symbolic one in refusing to be canceled from the conference, separate from, but obviously connected to what I actually said. I want to focus on the symbolic aspect of speech because it's not transparent. I was, in this act of speech, physically outside of, banished from the conference itself, much like the picket line has a right to symbolic speech only outside the private property of the company. But the University of Louisville is a public institution, and they cannot ban my presence from an open public institution without cause. What they did do is override the judgment of the committee and remove my session, paper, and name from the conference program. My symbolic behavior then was to stand outside the boundaries of the conference and give a paper, quite a contradictory act of speech captured in the photo above. Here, the discomfort of being banished is as readable as the assertion of my right to be there, the head tilted up at an angle looking out and away from the non-site of the hotel meeting room toward ineffable space and uncertain goals. It is this dialectic between being canceled and refusing to be that I see in my physical presence, in the act of speech. I am reminded here of the megaphone of our conference poster, and you can see that here, the conference poster. And its inspiration in Rodchenko's poster above as not merely a positive assertion, but also an acknowledgement of its negative context, the condition of denial it seeks to overcome, caught at a precise moment. For Rodchenko, this negativity would be the social literacy challenges the poster sought to remedy. And I'll skip a paragraph here and just speak a little bit about what I said. What did I say in my speech, apart from tilting my head toward the ineffable? My argument was double-edged. I wanted to use Foucault's concept of parrhesia, or fearless speech, to show how call-out culture may begin with speaking truth to power, but also how it could be a site of misrecognition or non-transparency. And I have several examples of calling out that actually morphs into forms of prohibition of speech. The second part of my argument departed from the transparency of Foucault's fearless speech to the psychodynamics of speech in Lacan. My examples were the psychic investment in humiliation as a part of identity construction in one of these acts of calling out, and the formation of the collective subject in relationship to unconscious content along the lines of my seminar, Questions of Unreason, which is the beginning of my getting into the situation I found myself in. Using Lacan's distinction between acting out and passage à l'acte, I discussed the online mobbing campaign I experienced as a form of passivizing asociality that destroys both persons and social bonds. In the forms of mobbing and canceling, the person no longer exists. The name becomes a shapeshifter for any kind of traumatic content. The forms that mobbing and canceling take are the derealization of the person and an entry into the real, into a condition of media-propagated unreason that mimics the disinformation, fake news, and projection in the current public sphere. What I did not discuss is anything specific about the case, which I intend to address responsibly at the proper time. And I should add that I'm really forbidden to comment on the case that caused this to happen as it's ongoing. So that is a little bit on what I experienced in 2020, being canceled from the Louisville Conference. This year I'm invited and I plan to attend, so hopefully everything will go well. But there's been another instance of speech, and this has to do with observances of the work and life of the Lebanese American visual artist and writer Etel Adnan, who lived in Paris and only recently died in November of 2021. She was a friend, and I, late in life, became friendly with her and got to know her. And her passing was deeply mourned by many. In November, I was asked by the Guggenheim Museum to participate in a memorial or an event on her work, which was being exhibited at the Guggenheim. For one reason or another, COVID, who knows, I was not invited to participate in the live event, but was commissioned to produce a written work. So a live event of speech, of readings for Etel Adnan took place in January of this year with poets who were remarkable. And I produced a written work. So I'm unsure what kind of situation this is, and I'm not making any claims one way or the other, except that I wasn't able to present my work at the reading that took place, most likely due to COVID. So I want to return to this moment of presenting a work for Etel Adnan and talk a little bit about the translation I did, inspired really by the invitation, of her work, the Beirut-Hell Express, L'Express Beirut-Enfer, published in French by Galerie Lelong last year, and which is a remarkable work written in open form like this. Well, I made a translation of this work for publication, and the work was in fact published by the Guggenheim Museum. And this is the work, which I'll put up on screen, the Beirut-Hell remix. Now, what I did in translating this poem of Etel Adnan's was somewhat radical. I translated and adapted the open form of her French poem, which is very much an invocation and apostrophe, let's say, to what was going on in Beirut, Lebanon, about 1970, which was the beginnings of a terrible series of events that would culminate in civil war in 1975. And she was predicting this coming disaster in her poem. And she was concerned all her life with the fate of Beirut, where she was basically formed as an intellectual, but could no longer live. And even up into her death was constantly referencing the situation in Beirut. So in homage to Etel Adnan, I wanted to present a translation, but adaptation, a rethinking, a refiguring of her work in terms that completely changed its metrics, that sampled from her original and elaborated on it, sometimes translated things that weren't in the poem. It was a very free interpretive adaptation, let's say. And in itself, you know, we could discuss many things about the politics of translation, but I just simply will present it. And here we can see the very regular form in which I translated the poem into, 3-line stanzas where the lines are all about the same length. Well, this certainly has an effect on the content of the work, which is, in my view, to intensify it and to make it strange in the good old Victor Shklovsky sense of defamiliarization. As an act of translation, I'm rethinking and representing Etel Adnan's work. So I wanted to read one section of that, the third one. This is what I would have liked to have read in the company of the other poets, but now I will read. And so it's an act of speech. And my speech is the presentation now of the third part of what I've titled the Beirut-Hell Remix after Etel Adnan. Unreal city, more than that, as the wind rising pregnant with the sins of the world, it is in your body foreigners ply their traitorous alchemy, giving birth to expectations of the October wind I love. Reddish skies predicting war to come from where I write. Sodium vapor lamps lighting the fishermen and their boats, the bay outlasting any light. Rue Hamra, if it could talk, neural networks would fray. Our skin tones blanch, spectators becoming specters, and money exuding a stink. Now ready for reinvestment, where formerly I would fall on my knees for the children who were sold for pleasure of a night or of an afternoon, or later, 4 a.m. Sadism was cheap in Beirut. City, what crimes in your bars? What alcohol in the bathtubs of more respectable homes? What fiduciary gains in the muezzin's cry? Illustrious city, now more famous than hell, denizen of all passageways, queen of all trade. Precious object of our nocturnal love, you have intoxicated us with your inaccessible purity, only to provoke the storm to come. Now the trumpet is sounded. Jazz has arrived. It is the hour of delirium, when time stops, the hour, and our destiny is made clear. We are unclothed. Gilgamesh and his secret herb. Citizens of Beirut, covered in figures and surfeited with greasy food, dumbed down with malignant thoughts. Do you have any memory of the night of September 18th? A motorized angel crosses the sky over the liberated zone. You must break all mirrors. Turn your direction toward Mount Sanin. Look at the sun when it is rising as if new. Draw your swords and tear the Arab world apart so that only liberty bursts through. Here I make a spontaneous funeral oration pronounced over our material remains, not sulfur or manganese, but potassium chloride in the wells and quicklime on the houses. Thus, to treasonous painters, go plunge into steaming vats of acid. To treasonous poets, you speak of roses in a city, but it's a garden of asphalt. To treasonous governments, your umbilical cords are only the telephone lines connecting Washington to Vladivostok. To treasonous priests, you play hide and seek with money in your schools while consciences are left exposed for vermin. Let liberation liberate you. And to the city at the foot of the mountain at sunrise, each one of us has become a legend, is becoming, and will. One homeless person of two is covered in lice, the velvet of his skin a living fur, while young persons stream out of the imperial cinema with puffy lips inflamed, of masturbation in the dark, atavistic hunger in the belly, and the perfume of celluloid taking the place of woman, a vast desert of love, walling them into graves ready-made. They only love their mothers. Yet I know streets where police will rape anything on two legs. As privileged sons drive past the scene in souped-up cars, glassy-eyed, stone-cold looks, here I would also announce the fabulous acceleration of planets and the dynamics of catastrophe. Sons of Canaan and the entire Levant, you are about to die for the last time. That's my homage to Etel Adnan. And she's writing at a difficult moment. It's a difficult speech, and I think it's parrhesia without question. And I wanted my poem to capture that in an act of speech, and I wanted to read it and present it. And now, grâce à Jérôme Lebre, Philosopher au présent, I'm able to do that. So I want to thank you very much for the opportunity, and hopefully we'll make some links available with this video, and you can follow up some of the discussion there. Thank you.